A reading from Matthew chapter 5. Again, you have heard it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. The word of the Lord.
Hi, my name is Bob. I'm part of the teaching team here at the meeting place. Hi. So it was a Tuesday morning back in November. Brian Cost, our family pastor, walked into my office. He had a look of grave concern on his face. He said, Bob, I'm here to tell you that there was an incident at youth last night. My heart started beating a little faster. He had my attention. He said, I'm here to report to you just in case there's calls. And listen, I think the best course of action is if you just come with me to go next door. And so we left the office and came over into this building and on our way to either the youth theater or the youth lounge. I don't remember all the questions that I asked him, but I would guess that I asked him questions like, are the kids okay? Have the parents been contacted? And other things that probably were part of my anxious response to the fact that there was a situation here that he needed me for. So we were walking up the stairs, we get to the top of the stairs, and the red room is right adjacent there. And so Brian says to me, listen, we're just going to pop in to the red room for 1 second. And he opens up the door, and I walk into the room, and the next thing I hear is, surprise! Our staff were gathered to celebrate my becoming the lead pastor of the meeting place. Brian Cost, our family pastor, lied to me. We're going to get back to that story because I don't want to leave it there because I don't want to sully his reputation. But isn't it interesting that we can remember when a person that we trust or that we trusted lies to us? We discovered that they're capable of doing that the very first time. And how that memory doesn't disappear. There's something about the way we talk to one another. There's something about assumptions we make about our honesty and our communication that I think it's just weighty. It makes us curious. Today we're continuing the study of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is with his disciples. He's delivering what has been called the greatest sermon ever preached. It has themes in it that he felt that were important for him to address with his followers. And so today we're looking at a particular set of words that he uses. They come right after some instructions that he gave to his followers about divorce and remarriage, just about marriage relationships. And they come just before words that have to do with how we engage with violence. And I think they're placed there very specifically. Here are those words. You've heard them from Precious as you read them for us. They start with the familiar pattern. Again, you have heard that it was said. And then Jesus moves on to say, but I tell you. And so we're going to be looking at what is it that Jesus is sharing here with his followers that would be familiar to them, and then helping them to see it from a new perspective. There's references here to oaths and vows, and so I thought it might be beneficial to us to understand what these things are. And likely you'll be familiar, but here is the accurate definition. An oath is a solemn promise, often invoking a divine witness regarding one's future action or behavior, or the other more crass version of this, a coarse or blasphemous word or phrase used to express anger or other strong emotion. A vow, similar, a solemn promise to do a specified thing, or perhaps with more maybe historical meaning, dedicate to someone or something, especially a deity. Jesus is addressing with the followers that were gathered with him that day themes, subjects that they would be familiar with. You and I have encountered oaths and vows in all kinds of ways. If you're married, you will have prepared marriage vows, and so this language is familiar to us. The disciples would have had a long history. They would have understood that this expression of oaths and vows was part of their tradition. It also belonged into, the common practice of the day. Deuteronomy 23 tells us this. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it, for the Lord your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from making a vow, you will not be guilty. Whatever your lips utter, you must be sure to do, because you made your vow freely to the Lord your God with your own mouth. Powerful words. Powerful words that would have, I think, confronted the disciples to say, yeah, like this is part of the way we speak. And so what is it that Jesus is changing about this practice? What's he challenging? What's he doing to change this up? And so I want to go back to our passage, Matthew 5, and just go through this. So notice what Jesus says here. Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord your vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. He's saying something very powerful here. He's saying, look, if it is important to you in a particular moment in time for you to make a declaration about truth, to say, no, look, in this instance, I'm making a statement, and in order for you to truly believe that I'm serious this time, or that this is the honest truth, that you link it to something that's greater than the words that you're speaking. And Jesus is saying, if you link it to heaven, well, that's the throne of God. If you link it to the earth, well, it's a footstool of God. If you link it to Jerusalem, this important city, what you're doing is you're tying your promise, you're tying this truth-telling to this thing that's greater than you, but it's not for you to give. This is the realm of God. It belongs to him. You really don't have access to it. How dare you, in some ways, make a promise based on this principle? So what he's saying to us here, if you draw this to a complete conclusion, is that there isn't actually a time when you and I speak any word at all that isn't declared in the presence of God. So when we might feel the necessity to say, I swear on my mother's grave, it's an unnecessary saying, because everything we say should in fact embody truth, because it's spoken in the presence of God. There is no distinction between the things that we say that have a vow connected, the things that we say that don't have a vow connected to them. This is an interesting concept. Jesus also indicates here that because we feel the necessity to introduce this practice of oaths and vows, it actually tells the story that we do really honestly believe that we live in a world of lies. Why is it necessary for us to at times try to convince people that what we're saying in this moment is true? And so we use this connection. In my childhood, I don't know if you ever used this line, but this is the most powerful thing that I could create in my own mind when I was fighting with my sisters, and I wanted them to believe so badly that I was right. I would say to them, when we get to heaven, you can ask Jesus. Right? It's a vow of sorts. It's connected to him. Right? We live in a world that is filled with lies. I do think there's a third thing that Jesus is challenging here, and I think he is challenging this notion. If we go back to the text, it finishes with verse 37. It says this: all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. There's something about the simplicity of simply saying yes or no that I think probably should encourage us to maybe say less altogether, to decide not everything needs to be commented on, not everything requires words in response. William Barclay captures this thought beautifully in his words this way: here's a great eternal truth. Life cannot be divided into compartments in some of which God is involved. and in others of which he is not involved. There cannot be one kind of language in the church and another kind of language in the shipyard or the factory or the office. There cannot be one kind of conduct in the church and another kind of conduct in the business world. The fact is that God does not need to be invited into certain departments of life and kept out of others. He is everywhere, all through life and in every activity of life. He hears not only the words which are spoken in his name, he hears all words. And there cannot be any such thing as a form of words which evades bringing God into any transaction. We will regard all promises as sacred if we remember that all promises are made in the presence of God. He's elevating the importance of speech. He's elevating the significance of the words that you and I dare speak, to help the people that we're speaking to understand that our desire is to tell the truth. But because we live in a world where we don't always tell the truth, it's compromised, it's gotten a little bit messy. I want to look at two categories of speech just to help us engage this for ourselves, because these words that that are captured of Jesus in Matthew chapter 5 were directed at his followers, but of course we try to draw meaning out of them. How do they apply to us? And I want to use two categories. The first one is that speech can be used as a weapon. Now here's the interesting thing. We have in this instance the gift of understanding that when Jesus spoke to his followers on the mountainside on that particular day and addressed this particular subject, that it left a lasting impression with his followers. And the way we can tell is if we look at the writings of one of his followers who would have been under the instruction of Jesus, and what did this person do with this particular theme as Jesus presents it. The person we're looking at is James. Now, James is the half-brother of Jesus. And just for a moment, imagine what it would take for one brother to believe of another brother that he is the Son of God. That's complicated, right? James captures the notion, the weight of our words with these powerful words in chapter 3. It says this, "Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfectly perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With a tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. Sobering. Okay? It's actually surprising that we have the courage to open our mouths at all in light of something like this. It seems like we're all sunk. I don't have to say very much about this text because I'm guessing that right now, as you've heard these words written by James, that likely memories are coming back where you recognize that you used your voice as a weapon, your words as a weapon. I know that's true for me. I'm troubled by my capacity to do harm in the way I speak, so it's familiar to us. On the flip side, on the good side, we can also use speech as a gift. as a blessing that we extend to others. Here's Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Don't you love that? I love the positivity of this. Speak what is helpful, what builds others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. I really like it. I read a book by John Acuff called Soundtracks. This is a book that captures the messages that we receive, but certainly also the messages that we send. In chapter 2, he gives some very simple instructions that I think in some ways remind me of some of the values that are captured in Scripture. And he suggests that as we consider speaking, that we look at 3 questions before we do. Now, John Acuff is a pastor's kid, so I'm guessing that he was influenced by the teaching he received in his home. The 3 questions are this. The first one is it true? Is the thing that I'm about to say, is it true? The second one is it kind? And the third one is it helpful? Consider for a moment what would happen to the language that we use, to the words that we speak, if we considered those questions before we actually uttered a single word. It's an invitation, I think, for us to consider. Now, you're listening to this and going, yeah, but communication is really much more complicated than that, isn't it? It's not quite that simple. It's not like speech is only weapon and speech is only gift, because there are more than one party involved. And so I want to look at a diagram with you to help us unpack this a little bit. How does communication work? Here's the diagram. There is a private realm, so the stuff that happens in your minds, and then there is a public realm where the thing that you're thinking about finds its way into the public realm and is noted. I want to use the example of Brian's blatant lie to me back in November. So here's Brian. Can you imagine being poor Brian? Right? The staff are trying to pull off a surprise party for me. Someone's going to have to figure out a way of getting me from my office over here to the party. How are they going to go about doing this? Because, if they don't come and invite me to this thing, how is this going to work? They want to keep it a surprise. And then at 12 noon or so, I might just, get out of my office and walk over to the lunch, like the staff room where we have lunch, and find myself there sitting all by myself and wondering where everyone is. And of course, this isn't going to be good, so how is he going to do this? And I don't know if Brian volunteered or if he was assigned to this, but Brian is thinking about, I have to get Bob to this party. So his intent is to achieve this goal because he wants to make sure that he's participating with the rest of the staff who are giggling behind this closed door. So Brian chooses, and this is what happens in the messages. We have an intent, we want to communicate a certain thing. We run it through a lens. This lens is often a cultural lens, but in this specific instance, Brian is having to think about what details can he add to the thing that he's going to say to me to get me to come next door that is going to seem very credible to me. It's going to make sense to me. It's going to make me understand that, yes, he's in fact saying something that I can follow, and it just all adds up. So he comes to me to talk with me about a concern about youth ministry. So this is his department. He oversees children and youth ministries, and so it makes sense, right? He comes to talk to me about the youth thing. He also knows that my schedule isn't that predictable, especially on a Tuesday, where it may not be obvious that if he comes and shares with me that I need to do something about it in the immediate. Because he might come to me and say, I need to talk with you about this thing that happened at youth, and maybe I'm on the phone, or maybe I'm in the midst of something, or maybe I have an appointment I need to rush off to, including a lunch appointment, and so how is he going to persuade me to come? And so he creates a moment of urgency. Something's going to catch my attention, something that's going to make me drop everything else and make this particular moment a priority. So he says to me, there was an incident at youth. And then to get me over here, the best course of action is for you to come over and see for yourself. Can you imagine where my imagination took me? Like, what am I going to say? Blood stains on the carpet? Like, what is happening, right? So he's using, like he's encoding his message. So when I receive it, that it causes the reaction that he's looking for, right? Because he's deliberate about achieving what he intends to achieve. Now, here's the interesting thing that happens. He speaks his words out loud. They enter into the public realm. But now, of course, I'm interpreting them, right? They're coming back to me through a lens that I apply. Okay, this is Brian. I've been a colleague of his for a long, long time. I trust him. He seems burdened. I love him. I want to be a support to him. I want to make sure that I partner well with him. Everything about this wants me to respond to this request that he's made. I really want to be present in his life to offer some reassurance so that he's going to be okay. And so I'm running this all through my lens, and it all adds up. And so the message arrives. But of course, as we're walking, Brian is processing the fact that he's just lied to his lead pastor. And he's making assumptions about, what this is going to mean in the end, and he's probably somewhat curious about how I'll react to the surprise. And I'm trying to make sense of the circumstance, and I'm also working with assumptions. My feelings are involved. I used to be the youth pastor here, so there's lots of things that are at work. And so in this process, this is now in the private realm, we're trying to make sense of the messages we've sent and we've received. This is the complexity of one single moment. And this is what happens. As soon as I walk in the door and I hear surprise, there's another filter in place. Because instantly I recognize that Brian is still the honest guy that I've always known him to be. He's not, in fact, a liar at all. In fact, the lie that he told me to get me to the surprise party hasn't left any damage. It hasn't unsettled anything. It hasn't eroded the foundation of trust that he and I have with each other, because I understand that he was in this circumstance where he had to find a way to achieve this goal. And I don't hold it against him at all. And so please, don't remember that Brian Cost, our family pastor, lied to me. Remember that he was on a mission. Okay, and if there was a need for him to be forgiven, I've completely forgiven him. He's free. He's a trustworthy guy. You're with me? Communication is complicated, isn't it? You're thinking about many conversations that you've had and wondering about how this pertains. Now, here is the further gift as we explore Jesus' communication to his disciples and teaching with his conviction about how it is that they are to see their world, confirmed again as we return to James, his half-brother, one of his followers. And here's the text. In James chapter 5, he writes this. Now, this is sometime later, after the Sermon on the Mount has taken place. It says this: "Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth, or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no, otherwise you will be condemned." Do you notice that this is almost a parallel passage of the Matthew 5 passage? They match almost completely. Don't swear by anything. Keep your simple communication to be about yes and no. And whereas the Matthew passage ends with all other things come from the evil one, James uses otherwise you will be condemned, also referencing an evil outcome. So Jesus was very effective in communicating that message because one of his followers is able to repeat the thing. Now, if you opened up your Bibles and if you would look at this text in James, you would notice something interesting, and that is that there is a break between these verses and what follows after. Well, just remember when James wrote that letter, he didn't have chapter and verse divisions. He was writing a letter. You don't have chapter and verse divisions in emails or letters that you send. So someone came along and divided it up into more user-friendly chunks. But I think there's a continuation of something here which I think is compelling, because this gets to the heart of what it then means for us to communicate in a way that is influenced and pleasing to Jesus. This is what it says: "Is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise. Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective." This is the kind of community that becomes available when you and I start using yes and no, when we keep our messages simple and not convoluted, but rather just straightforward, where we turn to each other and say, I'm having a lousy day. Will you spend time with me to encourage me? I'm having the most extraordinary day. Can you help me celebrate? I'm overwhelmed by sin in my life. Will you listen to my confession and pray with me for forgiveness? I'm sick. I'm ill. I need to be cured. Can we approach the throne of Jesus and ask him to heal me? You see, the kind of community that can come as a result of us being able to simply be honest with one another. And we could say the things that are the most true, all entirely true of us, as opposed to finding ways to explain it away or to hide things, but just to simply say it. This allows us to say things like, I am sorry. I am wrong. I need help. Those kinds of words. To get the attention of other people. To be genuine in the way we communicate. Matthew chapter 5 finishes with these words. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. This is a very curious thing. Here's the curious thing about this. Jesus is saying to us, look, you do not have to include oaths and vows in order to communicate powerfully with one another. Consider everything you say as sacred. Consider everything you say to be done in the presence of God. Anything else leads towards the evil one. And here's how this works. The evil one would love us to continue to live in a world that is made up of lies. As one commentary said it, he would love for us to stay in the darkness of doubt. Can I trust the person? Can I trust what they're saying to be true or not? Right? We live in this world of doubt. What if you and I started a community where we would always speak the truth? What would that look like? I think that's the invitation that Jesus is extending to us.
Thank you so much for your teaching this morning, for your reminder about the importance of words. Somebody just says, if we can't make our hair white or black, Pastor Bob, does that suggest that God made your hair so white?
Yes, he did.
So a couple people had this very practical question. Should I swear an oath if I appear in court?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I would say that if we understand that every word we speak is sacred, because it's all spoken in the presence of God, then for you to understand that as you're swearing this oath, this allegiance, that it actually doesn't mean that this is now different than anything else that you may speak at other times. I will say, and this is a personal story, it's part of our family history, if you want. My father came to Canada from Germany wanting to be a farmer. Now, God had a surprise for him. He turned out to be a pastor for 42 years, so he didn't actually end up following his dream fully. But there was a moment when he decided that he loved this country so much he wanted to become a citizen. But he was studying to enter into ministry. So he went, and there was a moment where he had to swear upon the Bible to keep the promises, the Pledge of Allegiance, whatever it may be, to Canada. And because of his own convictions, he asked that he not be required to do such a thing. And the judge was gracious to grant that to him, to say, you can make a promise that is meaningful to you, and it doesn't have to be that. So I would say that I think it's probably up to us. Just understand that the words that the swearing that you do there shouldn't for you mean I am now going to tell the truth, whereas all the other times I'll give myself permission not to.
Right.
If I can just say it that way.
Okay. Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And we say, it's not personal, it's just business. And so this whole idea of Jesus-shaped speech really struck people in a variety of questions. This person says, what are ways we can bring Jesus-shaped speech into negotiations, buying, selling, haggling over price, like all sorts of ways? How do we bring Jesus-shaped speech?
Right. Oh, that's such a big question. I would say that one of the things that has been really important for me to guide me in my conversations. For example, I'll give you this example. Somebody will come to my office because they have something to share with me. And they're sitting in my office, and I can tell that they want to confess, but I'm also aware that they're trying to sort out what they will share and what they won't share. And so I'll turn to them and say to them, look, you are created in the image of God. You have perfect autonomy to decide what's included in this conversation and what isn't. You don't owe me to fully disclose if that's uncomfortable to you. So I would say in all of our dealings, if we respect the person that we're speaking with as being a person who's been created in the image of God, that they are a reflection of Him, that might govern some of the ways that we interact with them, and understand that they are made in very unique ways that would require us to honor that. And then to understand that communication has that complication to it, whereas I'm not sure what lens the person is applying to what they're hearing from me, and I may be applying some kind of filter as I'm receiving information from them, but I could be wrong. And so to have a more generous perspective, to perhaps be more willing to extend that the person is speaking truthfully and all those kinds of things, I think is a way to at least honor the conversation to begin with.
Okay. So I hold the phone, I get to ask the questions. I'm going to ask a question now. I am a therapist,
Yes.
and I feel like a lot of my work comes out of this idea that people have, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And so there's so many conversations where people are so worried about using their words as poison that they don't say anything at all, and then things deteriorate and they come in. How do we do all those good things with words, even when it's going to get messy or hurtful? Like, how does that, my concern is, interact with what you have to say?
The simple principle I apply is this. My intentions are not to burden people with information that they can do nothing about. So if I've been hurt, it is not good for me to share this with every person that I meet, because they may not know what to do with that because they have no way of attending to my need. So I need places where I can have that kind of honesty to say the things that are on my mind that someone needs to be able to hear. But in that, I think there's even this idea that I still run it through the is it true? Is it kind? Is it helpful? So if I'm sharing this, does it still sort of meet that basic criteria? But yes, to bottle it up, to feel like you never get to say your piece, and it starts becoming this overwhelming reality, as you know, not healthy. Where are your safe outlets? This is where I think when James says, confess your sins to one another, be deliberate about knowing where that is. Who is that person that can receive it? Because you've made that arrangement in advance, so they know, oh, this is one of those moments you're just going to dump on me, and it's not about them receiving it as personal, but they're just hearing it to help me process what I'm sharing with them.
One last question, which I think speaks to the difficulty and the stuckness. I'm not sure if there's any answer, but I think a lot of people can resonate with the question. I really like the 3 things to use as a measuring stick about speaking the truth. I have a real difficulty speaking truth to my teenage children when I feel like I speak the truth in love and they don't receive it that way. Sometimes I don't say anything because of the fallout. I feel like no matter what I do, I lose.
Yeah. Well, you've heard the phrase here, we use it quite often, talk about how are you going to talk about it? Mm-hmm. When you're not, and so I want to be careful here because I understand that parent and children relationships are complicated, very complicated. But talk about how you're going to talk about it. When there is a moment when you're not at odds or in tension with your children, if there's a time for you to sit down and say, look, every once in a while, this is what happens. I have a truth that I want to share with you, but I don't know if you're ready to receive it. And sometimes I'm so overwhelmed by the truth that's resting on me that I feel responsible to share it with you. And so I do, even though I know your reaction may not be positive. Is there a way that we can establish some parameters? So in the future, when we get there, there is a way for us to navigate this. And perhaps there's a code word.
Okay.
So Hildy and I will say, let's talk about how we're going to talk about it. Like, because we use the actual words so we understand what we're doing now. But what's the code word with your children to say, this is one of those moments? And then everyone is, oh, okay, now we know what the parameter is, let's sort this out.
It's a really respectful way of inviting them into figuring out how you're going to have this conversation.
Make them part of the solution. So.
Thank you. This question came up in the first service. I'm going to ask it again. Good morning. If, when I get dragged into court and say no to putting my right hand on the Bible, but say let my yes be yes and no be no, would that appear rebellious or imply that I don't believe in the Bible?
Okay, so here's my response. This actually comes from my own family history. My father left Germany to come here to Canada to pursue a career in agriculture. He really wanted to be a farmer. God surprised him, invited him into a pastoral opportunity, and he was a pastor for 42 years. So here's the interesting thing. At one point, he decided that he loved this country so much that he wanted to become a citizen. And in the process of becoming a citizen, there came a point at which he needed to swear on the Bible. Now, he'd been doing pastoral studies, and so he was able to turn to the judge and say, look, the very Bible that you want me to swear on tells me not to. Is there a way for me not to do this? Is there another way for me to make my promise? And the judge graciously allowed. So I would say that my sense, at least, is that our legal system allows for matters of conscience where you can respond differently than the standard swearing by the Bible. But I would say the following to you. What if we take Jesus serious? Recognize that all of the words we speak are sacred. Then for you to swear on the Bible isn't actually a moment that elevates that particular promise versus all others. What it is then is it's a consistent practice to say, all of my words stand. They're of the same quality of commitment to truth as this moment is. And then it doesn't have to be as complicated as asking for a different way to complete that process. That would be just a suggestion I would make.
Okay. How does this teaching interpret our current common phrase, speak your truth? People say, I'm speaking my truth.
Right.
What do we do with that in light of what you've said this morning?
Well, I think intent matters a great deal, right? If we go back to the three questions, is it true, is it kind, is it helpful, that probably will sort some things out. Not everything requires our comment, and not every comment is helpful, and so to be discerning in which things we should in fact speak to. If there is the reality that perhaps you've never had a chance to speak your truth because it hasn't been granted you, and so now you're wanting that moment, I would just invite you to be discerning in how you express it and where you express it, depending on the nature of it. I always consider the words that I wish to speak, perhaps words that are hurts that I've experienced or hard things that I want to say, that I choose my audience carefully. I don't burden people with my burdens if I know that they can't do anything about them. I find people in my life who are there specifically, who have invited to be the listening ear to me. And so then I speak my truth in the context of that, knowing I've had a chance to say what's on my heart.
So it's about being very discerning.
I think we need to be careful, yes.
Okay. When I have been in the United States and participated in Episcopalian liturgy, there's this line in the liturgy that says, forgive us, Lord, for the way we have wronged you by what we have done and what we have left undone. And I guess I wonder, this last question comes out of forgive us for what we have said, but also what we have left unsaid.
Correct.
So, this question here, thank you for this call to greater honesty among other things. Does TMP see their own opportunities for growth here? At times in our past, when faced with situations where honesty was uncomfortable, we've taken the easy path, resorting to narratives which misrepresent. There are exciting opportunities for growth ahead which may not be fully realized if we don't embrace honesty as a core value in a healthier way. Then this person says, by the way, I see my own opportunities for growth here, big time, as the three fingers pointing back at me. Thanks in advance for your response.
Okay. The diagram that I use to show the complexity of communication continues to apply. And that is that even within this faith community, when we speak about truth-telling and the simple yes being a yes and the simple no being a no, the realities are that there are circumstances where there is some information that is held by some, but it isn't available to everyone else. And I think in some ways, one of the responses would be is how do we find ways to communicate to say, this is something that you can be aware of, but you can't be involved in the conversation. Like I think of, and I don't know what specific memories this person has of things of the past, But I think, for example, of circumstances that involve human resource matters. There are simply things that are related to human resource matters that are confidential. They need to be kept with a great deal of respect. They cannot be processed by this faith community, right? So as the lead pastor of this church, I am your servant, but you are not my master. In other words, I'm responsible to you, but the authorities you have to speak into the HR circumstances of my life are limited. They're not available to everyone. There's a group of people that have been elected to be about that. And so that would just be an example. There's probably others that I could come to. The fact is that there are times when we are guarded with the information and it communicates a dishonesty. We have to find a way to speak to it so that it assures people that dishonesty is not in play. It's just that the information is being treated with a great deal of care.
So we're having really respectful, candid conversations, but we're also respecting that there's a difference between secret and private.
Yeah.
And private's important.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Please close out the service.
Thanks. Sermon on the Mount. Picture Jesus talking to his followers. He's deliberate about what he includes. He decides to speak about this to his followers. We know that the evidence of James's writings tell us that the message that Jesus delivered left a lasting impression. In fact, it invites us in James chapter 5 to experience a kind of community that I think we can, and I think we do, but perhaps there's more opportunity. I would just invite you to imagine what that would look like in this faith community, that we would experience the most extraordinary thing with each other and with Jesus as our guide. Bless you. Looking forward to seeing you next Sunday.